Well, hey guys, thanks for joining us. I've got Val Cap with me today. So super blessed. One of my clients and a business coach, which is super cool. So she gets to support me and individuals like you. Valerie, can you kind of give us a little insight on what you do as a business coach?
Yeah. So thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm super pumped for the
Absolutely.
convo today. Yeah. So I'm a business coach and I work with coaches and consultants to help them launch and grow their coaching or consulting business. And so I do that in a variety of ways, through one-on-one and group programs and all types of stuff. So, yeah, so it keeps me busy. I love it. I've been a full-time
Super
entrepreneur for
cool.
a couple years now. Yeah.
That's awesome. So we're blessed to get your coaching so we can impact a lot more lives, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And for those of you guys that don't know who I am, my name is E-Lutz. I specialize in helping frustrated individuals create the best fit version of themselves. And I do that through mindset, nutrition, and fitness coaching. So Val and I were talking, it was 2 weeks ago now, and we were randomly talking, but what we do isn't random ever. We had mentioned self-love and self-care. So if you can kind of take us back to the conversation that we had, and there were some really good points that came out just of us organically talking.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about the idea of like what is self-love, and being a coach and you're a coach too, we hear this term a lot, right? Self-love, self-love, self-love. And it's like, well, what does that actually mean? And how do we practice self-love? And sometimes it sounds like it kind of sounds weird, right? Like, who walks around and like, I don't love myself. I don't love myself. I don't think people actually walk around
Yeah,
saying that, but our actions don't often match
that's so good.
loving
Yep.
ourselves, right? So for you and I, we were talking about specifically, right, like health and nutrition, because that's the area with which, you reside in mostly, and have helped me in my journey, um, as far as like being the healthiest version of myself. And so, we talked about like why sometimes it's not a priority for us and why we don't actually put ourselves first, and how that impacts not just our physical being, but our mental being, how it affects those around us. And I think that's why we wanted to kind of just share and talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, and one of the other things that just came to me from the conversation as well is we hear many times individuals that fall into higher health risk, so higher BMI, different levels of obesity, and it's like I love myself as I am, and the message is always love yourself, because as we increase love, we can impact a higher amount of individuals, or even if it's one or two individuals, we can impact them at a higher percentage, higher level of energy. So one of the things that have come to mind is having a conversation with an individual and the individual having self-worth based on a number or an appearance. And the invitation is always, we're more than just a number.
Mhm.
And part of self-love is when I got to pause for a second. My computer just started taking over there. Part of self-love is when I'm aware of increasing my immunity, my vitality, and I choose not to. Is that really self-love? As my weight increases, as my inflammation increases, as my health risk increase, that weight inflammation inches, that's an effect of being sick and being ill.
Mhm.
I've got allergies, and if I have allergies every day, my body gets used to that. So that's my normal. Doesn't change the fact that my immune system's down, my histamines are up.
Mhm.
So once I've got that knowledge of, oh, I can decrease my sickness, my
Mhm.
illness, my inflammation is an effect of that. Now my energy levels are higher. So I know as a client, I can impact my business at a higher level. I can impact my relationship with my wife at a higher level. So that's some of what was coming up when you and I were having that conversation. And I know there's multiple rabbit trails that we had during
Mhm.
the conversation, but to me that's one of them is using the label self-love
Right.
with complacency.
Yeah. For sure. So I think maybe a little context to that conversation and the complacency piece was so I was sharing with Esteban. So I'm in my early 40s, and in my 20s, which was 2 decades ago, I had a really unhealthy relationship with the scale. And I didn't have an eating disorder or any sort of like body dysmorphia, any of the things. But I really wanted to be my healthiest self, but what that manifested into was a bad relationship with the scale. And so when I came back into working and knowing that I wanted to take on my health, right? Because I wasn't feeling energetic, I wasn't feeling sharp. I just didn't love the way that I looked. I didn't feel like sexy. I didn't feel any of those things, right? And I knew like it was because of my health. I was really, really resistant to, when we first started working together, right, to claiming the number on the scale, because you were like, well, what do you want to be? I mean, you remember this, right? And I was like, I don't care about the number. It's how I want to feel. And so that's where it led into this conversation about, okay, if I don't want to have an unhealthy relationship with the scale, I still use the scale as a measure point, right? To where do I want to go towards? It doesn't even matter if I actually hit the number. And we were talking about that. And I've had this conversation with multiple people since then. And it's one of those conversations where it's like, well, why don't I actually care about that? Right? Why don't I care about what the number is? And I just want to work on how I want to feel. And you had said something that was really interesting, which was, it used to be all about being like skinny and thin and living this certain lifestyle, right? That was the message that we received years ago, right? And then it shifted to love yourself, love your body, right? Love yourself as you are, which is true. And there's that resistance, I think, sometimes to still take on ourselves to be our healthiest version, whatever that looks like. So it doesn't have to be this, unhealthy relationship to a number, but it is still about using that as a benchmark to get us to where we want to go, right? And part of that is pouring into ourselves. And that's actually an act of self-love. So I think there's this kind of two ends of the spectrum where it's like, no, I don't want to have to like be the skinniest ever. And right, we don't, right? It's just an indication of how healthy we are. Like,
So good. Yeah.
that makes sense.
You're using that term, pour into yourself.
Mhm.
And I like that. And
Mhm.
where I want to go with that is, if you're watching right now and just kind of resonates with you, it's not about the scale. However, the scale is GPS to your destination. And my destination is, I want increased energy for whatever that for is. And pouring into yourself is pour life into you. When
Mhm.
I'm consuming high nutrient, life-giving foods, my body's going to reflect it by the inflammation goes down, the inches goes down, the energy goes up, the body gets tight. So the self-love is key, number one. Number
Mhm.
two, to live the self-love, you get to pour love into you. And that's life, where a lot of times, Val, what we heard in the past was, you need to cut back. You
Mhm.
need to count calories. You need to starve yourself. And that's sickness. That's illness. That's deprivation. That's sacrifice, which is ill.
Yeah.
Energy's down. That's not love. That's not self-love. So going into self-love, it's
Mhm.
investing into yourself, and you're investing life into you. So that is what in this industry we term whole foods, life-giving foods, versus, if I were to practice self-love, I'm not going to put poisons into my body, because there is no self-love that comes within that. When somebody's aware that this is toxic for me, that's
Right.
not self-love.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think the intention behind it, and so that's something that I learned, right? And I had no idea. Like when we first started working together, I was like, oh, inflammation. It's like, I don't know, like in my joints or whatever. Like I didn't really understand what inflammation was and how it was created through putting these toxic things in our body, right? That we often think are actually healthy for us, like whole grains or,
Yep.
whatever it may be. I mean, there's certain very specific foods and things that create those, the toxicity.
That'll
Is that the
work.
right
That
word?
works. Yep.
You guys know what I mean? And inflammation and all the things. But once it's like once you know better, you get to do better. And part of that is being really intentional, right? So just as much as it is being intentional about carving out, let's say like a morning routine or exercise or a spiritual practice, anything that like fills your own cup, it also is the same with what we're putting in our body. So if I know that eating ice cream every night is not good for me, not just because of the weight, but because it's actually making me sick, I get to be intentional about those decisions. And that is actually loving on my body. Don't get me wrong, you guys, like I'll still eat ice cream. I just make a different decision around the ice cream.
Absolutely. And that's key. It's what's my mindset around the ice cream. And weight gain, for the most part, we've heard in the past, and we're running out of time here. So I know we'll be wrapping it up.
Yeah.
In the past, we hear somebody gains weight is because they're lazy and gluttony. That's so far from the truth. We're poisoning our bodies. The foods that are put out there in front of us are extremely addictive and so poisonous. So the body's response is, oh, it's getting inflamed and it's increasing fat out of sickness, out of illness, out of toxicity.
Yeah.
I'm going to use alcohol as an example. I haven't met one person yet that's like, alcohol is super healthy food. Yet when people drink it, they choose to drink it. They know the effects of it. It's so poisonous that in the youth, when you overdrink it, you vomit. Your body's like, get it out of me. It's that conscious choice. So the same thing for the ice cream, for different foods. Once you've got the knowledge, it's like, oh, I'm aware of the adverse effect and negative effects. I'm choosing to consume that versus a breakdown. So that's tying into the self-love. When self-love is a focus, as I am an advocate, always being there, irrelevant of what the body frame is. Mm-hmm. And have those actions fall into self-love means I take care of me because I do love me. And because I love me, I now have the opportunity to share that fruit with others.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I want to say this too, Asma, because I think this is really important. A lot of times we don't realize that, and I'm speaking from personal experience and as a coach and all the things, is we don't always realize that we're sacrificing ourselves in a lot of ways, right? It's not a conscious decision, like I'm going to put my family first, or I'm going to put my clients first, or whatever. And yet it's exactly what we do for a variety of reasons, which we don't have the time to go in here. But for someone who's like, like, well, yeah, maybe that's easy for you, Val, or whatever, or it's easy for you, Esteban, you already know, what to do. Yeah. And again, it's once you know better, you do differently, but it's also can be about fueling into yourself. There is impact outside of yourself. So if anything, start there. Right. And maybe that'll
repeat that again. Fueling into yourself.
Yeah. Pouring into yourself, fueling your body, right? Doing the things that you need to do for you actually impacts those outside of you.
I like that. That's good. Right. That's a quote. You guys write that down. So those of us that fall into, I'm not taking care of myself right now because there's other priorities in life. There's these tasks that are so big, if I've got to take care of the kids, or I've got to take care of the business, or I can't focus on me, because I'd say lean into what our coach Val just said. Mm-hmm. Fueling into yourself allows you to pour out to others. That's so good. So as we wrap up, I've got two things for you. Number one, if people want to get a hold of you, where can they get a hold of you? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at The Nurturing Collective, either on Facebook, Instagram, or just my website is thenurturingcollective.com.
Go on there, because she's got some phenomenal information that she sends out on a weekly basis. So definitely. We'll put the links in the comments below.
Thanks.
And 2 to 3 tips. I'm putting you on the spot, and I appreciate you allowing me to do that. 2 to 3 points that you give your coaches as far as here's a great way to invest into you, whether it's tips on here's how you start your day, here's whatever it is that are some good 2 to 3 takeaways on here's how I can evolve as a leader, as a coach, as a person.
Oh my gosh, top 2 to 3 tips. Oh, yeah. Well, I can say from my personal experience and what I know a lot of coaches struggle with, especially as they're starting a business and they're trying to do all the things, sometimes working in corporate and sometimes transitioning, into an entrepreneur as a coach. I say like focus on focus on your time management. And what I mean by that is create a plan, create a system where you actually put yourself first, right?
Okay.
So that means like carving out the time that you need to fuel yourself. We
So
just
like I got to do it to me first.
yeah, you get to do it to yourself first. That's the first thing. And then from there, then we get to put the non-negotiables outside of that
I
on
like, you know, having business owners, executives, parents as clients.
Mhm.
A lot of times they come into it, I'm last because,
Mhm.
so that goes back to self-love. That's awesome.
Mhm. Yeah.
Continue with that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a really important place to be, because when you're playing a big game, and I know that's who you worked with as well, Esteban, like high performers, entrepreneurs, athletes, all the thing, like we do have full plates. There's no doubt about that, right?
Yeah.
And we get to manage our time so we can actually be intentional about the things that we want to create. Is there a perfect system to that? Absolutely not. Are there times where we're going to not put ourselves first? Of course, right? But at the same time, it's a practice that we get to start evolving into, and whatever that looks like for you. So, just put yourself first and then start adding the things in, because what happens if we don't? We're putting ourselves last. And that's where the burnout, the resentment, not getting stuff done, missing deadline, all the things that don't work because we're not putting ourselves first. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's my number one tip for life and business.
Do you have a second takeaway?
Second takeaway or second tip. Yeah, I actually do. And this is to edify you, I think, Esteban, and the people that are here following you and following your work. Like, one of the things that I knew was that I was not putting myself first, right, in my health and wellness. And I was not, I didn't want to put the time into it. I didn't want to try to figure it all out. Like, I knew there's so much change in science, and, you hear all the time, like paleo, keto, do this, hit workouts, all the things. And it felt so overwhelming. I'm like, I don't have time to like research that. Right. And so what I love about you, and this is a tip for someone else, right? What I loved about working with you, Esteban, is that you really create a plan that works for each individual person, right? It's like, what are my specific, and actually my husband and I both work with Esteban. And so he created our own individual plans, right? So we could hit our specific goals. And that's what I needed. So the tip would be, no matter what you're trying to get to in life or business, seek support to help you so you're not going at it alone. It will increase your speed, increase your time. Like, it just makes everything go faster because you're not trying to figure it out on your own. So basically, don't lone wolf it, is what I'm trying to say.
I like that. Yeah. And I can say from self-experience, it speeds up that learning curve. Yeah. So life is short. Let's build whatever we're going to build, whether it's relationships, finances, business, physical body. Let's get the coach, the best of any industry in the world, athletes, artists, singers, business, always have coaches. So great point. 2 awesome points. Very cool. So I appreciate you joining me today. One more time before you go, somebody's watching. They're like, that chick knows what she's talking about. How do I get some more information? Where can they follow you and where can they contact you?
Yeah. Again, Nurturing Collective or nurturingcollective.com. That is the name of my business. Or you can just connect with me here on Facebook, Valerie, not Val Cap, but Valerie Cap. So happy to connect with anybody around business, or if you have questions about my journey with Esteban or anybody else, like just hit me up. So
awesome.
Yeah,
Valerie, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Until next time, you guys, thanks for watching again. We'll see you next time as well. See ya.
See ya.